Hey everybody, DM Jim here, and welcome to another episode of Game Terrain Engineering. This episode is going to be a quick build, but there's a little bit of a story behind it. I got an email from a subscriber. He provided me a link to a Kickstarter that had some really cool science fiction terrain. And I'll put a link to that Kickstarter in the description below, but I believe it's over with. The person who emailed me, he said, hey, you have a 3D printer, you might find these cool. And he said something along the lines of, I wish I had a 3D printer. And I have to admit, the link was cool. The science fiction terrain looked really, really good. But I emailed him back and I said, hey, just because you don't have a 3D printer does not mean you can't make these things. And we had a little back and forth email discussion, about 4 or 5 emails. And basically what it came down to was, he said, I just don't know where to start. I don't know. I look at something like that, and I'm going to put a picture right here of a particular piece of terrain that he was talking about. This is a container, I believe, the Mobius container. Anyway, during our discussion, it occurred to me that, there are a lot of people that do not have 3D printers. And so these Kickstarters, and there's a lot of these things popping up, and they're great for those of us who have a 3D printer. If you don't have one, that should not be the end of your quest to duplicate that terrain on your own gaming table. So during that conversation, I mentioned to him, I think you could make something like this. It wouldn't be that bad. And I stepped right into it. He challenged me. He said, do you think you could do like a quick build and show me how to do it? Now, quick builds are really fun. I know that Jeremy over at Black Magic Craft does them. I know Scotty's the king of them. Bill at Wylock's Armory, he does them. Quick builds are a fun way for those of us who like to make things to show people how to duplicate it quickly. Now, that particular STL model, the container, just looking at it, and I kind of have an estimate of the size of it based on some comparisons. If I had to guess, based on the detail and the size of that object, now it could probably be printed hollow, okay? But I'm going to estimate that thing could take anywhere from 3 hours up to 5 or 6 hours, maybe even more, depending on the speed of your printer and the quality and things like that. So the challenge I issued myself was try to duplicate that container. Don't make an exact copy of it. I don't want to steal somebody's idea, but try to come up with something similar. Make it from non-3D printable parts, supplies that can be found by most crafters, and make it in less than 3 hours. So I did. And this is what I came up with. I'm going to put the picture up again of the Mobius container right here. Okay, take a look. And then this is mine. And it may not be a container. It could be a habitat or something. I want to show it to you. I don't know if the video is doing the justice, but I'll put some close-up images of it so you can see. But it is a container, or a habitat is what I call it, because my son recently went to space camp in Huntsville, Alabama, and they had these habitats that were round, and these just reminded me of the habitats that they had there. Anyway, the only thing I haven't made is the brace, or the, I guess the support, the 3-legged or 2-legged thing that this would sit in. I could make that, not a problem. But this was the big thing. I wanted to see if I could make this in under 3 hours. I kept track of my time, and I'm going to show you in just a second all the steps that I did, or most of the steps. I'm not going to show you all of them. The painting was kind of boring, the dry washing, things like that. Total time to make this, I'm kid you not, is less than 2 hours. It was close to 1 hour and 47 minutes. 1 hour and 47 minutes to make this. And if I just spent a little more time, I probably could have done some other things. Like, for instance, I didn't paint the bottom. I'm going for speed here. This thing sits like this, so I didn't paint the bottom. Probably will later. And I also didn't add any detail to the back. I only concentrated on the front, the top, and the sides, okay? So anyway, let's get to the video. Let me show you how I made this, and then I'll come back and talk about some of the finer points. I started out by creating a template of the shape of the habitat, just a ruler and some chipboard, and I drew out this 6-sided shape that I wanted. Now, this template is going to be used with my Proxxon foam cutter, but if you don't have a foam cutter, you can still create this template. You'll just use a blade to cut out what you need, which is 3 pieces of foam, 1 for each end and 1 for the middle. You don't have to do the middle, but I did it because I think it will give the structure a little more strength. So right here, I'm just using my Proxxon. I tape the template to a piece of 1/2-inch foam, and I just trace around the template, and I created 3 of these these copies of the six-sided shape. After I made those six sides, I took a piece of 6" by 12" chipboard, and I used a knife to score it every 1.5 inches. That was the length of each side of the six foam pieces. I laid down some glue and then took the 3 pieces and wrapped them inside the cardboard, and I used painter's tape to hold it together and secure it while the glue dried. While the glue was drying, I cut some side panels for the various sides of the structure. I only dealt with 3 sides, the 2 top pieces that are at 45 degrees roughly, and the very flat surface on top. I took a piece of chipboard and I cut these unusual shapes, not square panels or rectangular panels. They just have some odds and ends shapes, and I glued those to the top. And then I cut 2 1.5" by 6" pieces of chipboard right here, and then I trimmed off 1/8 inch all the way around, and I glued them in place and used tape to hold them so they wouldn't slide around. And this just gives the habitat some 3-dimensional panels that sort of stick out from the body. Next, I took my Proxon and I set it to 1.5 inch, and I cut a single piece, and then from that I cut 1/2 inch. So these are 1/2 inch by 1.5 inch pieces. I did 8 of these, and these will be glued to the side. I also set the angle a little bit and took an angled piece to give them a bevel. Then it was just a matter of gluing them on. I used a ruler and I measured 1 inch from the end of each, and that's where I glued the first one. And then I flipped it around, measured 1 inch, glued that one, and then for the other 2 I just eyeballed them and gave them about 1/8 inch between the pairs. Then I took some granny-grating and I cut little pieces that would fit over these foam pieces to sort of give them a grill, or maybe it's a duct, some duct work or whatever. But it was a nice touch, and it ended up looking really good. Those pieces were glued on with white glue instead of hot glue. I was worried the hot glue might poke through the holes, so I just used white glue and let it dry really well. Then I went and added some details. I added some beads, some round pieces, some electronic components, as you can see here. Just, whatever looked sort of techie looking or industrial. I didn't want to overdo it. You can overdo it, but I think I stopped at a good point. I glued just enough on to give it some interesting bits and pieces. Then I hit it with I hit all the surfaces with the black Mod Podge. It's just Mod Podge with some black paint mixed in. And I did this mainly to cover all the foam, but also to give the entire piece of terrain some strength before I ended up painting it. After the Mod Podge dried, I took some white paint and covered it in white paint. It doesn't look good here. That's because I didn't go over it with a second coat, but mainly this was just to cover any foam I might have missed before I took it and spray painted it white. Finally, the last thing was I took some light gray paint and I did just some dry brushing all over it just to give it an aged, weathered look. I didn't do a wash. I thought about it. I'm still not sure if I'm going to, but it definitely looks beat up and dirty, and the gray is not overdone at all. Okay, there you go. That's how I made this container, similar to the STL file from that Kickstarter. This one was made from 1/2 inch foam, chipboard that was used to wrap around the three six-sided foam pieces I cut. I used granny-grating for these grill pieces. I used a lot of chipboard for these little, pieces that you just glue on to give it, depth, or some three-dimensional objects. These were just standard electrical components. I think they're called 3-wire connectors What else? Some headers. These are electronic components. Some gem, stick-on little gem facet things for the circles. And the rest of it was just foam. These side pieces were cut out of foam. You saw it in the video. Glue it all together. I used Jeremy's at Black Magic Crafts. I used his Mod Podge with black paint to coat the whole thing first to give it, make it a little more rugged. Then I painted it white, and then I spray painted it. The white paint was just to make sure that the spray paint didn't eat any of the foam, that I'd gotten everything covered. And after the white spray paint, I just did the detail work, okay? Now, one thing I've learned about making these small models and making them look, what I consider to be good for the tabletop is it's all about the details. These people that have been making spaceships and things for special effects in science fiction movies like the Millennium Falcon, the big Star Destroyers in Star Wars and things like that, they learned a long time ago that the secret to making something small look real is details. Add greebles. They call them greebles. They're all the little, doodads that you add on, wires and all kinds of craziness. But when it's all painted and dirtied up and weathered, it gives it a very, a realistic look. And I think I got away with it on this one. The white, I think, is flooding out the camera, but you can see right there, you can see the detail. I haven't even given this a wash. I'm debating giving it a wash. It doesn't really need it. Maybe I will. But it's dirty. It's grungy looking, and it took less than 2 hours to make using standard materials that you can find at most hobby stores, and it's a speed build. 2 hours to make this. So if you wanted 3 of them for your tabletop, you're looking at 6 hours. You could do that on a Saturday afternoon. But it's very light, and I'm happy with it. It looks like a variation of that Kickstarter container, but I didn't steal the whole idea. The shape is in the sides. What I was going for is to show those of you who don't have a 3D printer that if you see something you like that's a 3D printed file, why not try and make it out of just regular pieces? You can. Now, granted, I have a 3D printer. Let's say this took 5 hours to print. The nice thing about a 3D printer is I load the file into it, I start it up, and I can go away and do something else and let it run. 5 hours later, I have it. Now, I still have to paint it or prime it and paint it. But, this took 2 hours of my time. I had to be concentrating, not counting the paint drying time, which didn't take long. 2 hours versus 5. And the time it would take me to print, say, one of these, if I'm assuming a 5-hour print, I could have almost 3 of these completed, okay? So there are advantages to not going the 3D printer route. And I have heard your complaints. Some people think that my channel focuses too much on 3D printing files. A lot of times I only use my 3D printer for greebles and add-ons. I don't think I do a lot of 3D printing completely. Now I have done it, like for instance the Star Wars bunker. That was completely 3D printed. I'll put a link right here to that one. Typically I try not to rely on just my 3D printer for the whole thing. I use it for bits and pieces. But when possible, if somebody gives me a file that's got the detail, I'm going to print it. Why not? I can go away and work on another project. So anyway, I hope you like this. This is my quick build. The person who I was communicating with about this, I hope you like this. And guess what? I have one more. You said you liked one other structure that was in that Kickstarter. So if you'll give me a few more days or a week or so, I'm going to post another quick build for that one that you like. I'll make it a surprise for the rest of everyone else, but I think you'll like it. I'm almost done with it, but it's not ready to show just yet. So anyway, there's your container. Quick build it. You can do it. I promise you can do it. Follow the steps I did or cheat. If you don't want to make it out of chipboard, wrap it with, I don't know, poster board or something. It's going to be a little soft. You may want to be careful with it, but this one is solid. It's not going to break. Anyway, thanks for the idea. You know who you are. And I hope you can duplicate it many, many times. Stay tuned. I got another one for you, okay? This is DM Jim. I'll see you in the next episode.